Welcome back to Where on Earth, the channel that finds the geography behind the story's history left unfinished. November 15, 1884. Berlin, Germany. 14 nations gathered around a table. On that table was a map of Africa. It was incomplete and inaccurate, but that did not matter. Over the next 44 days, European powers divided the African continent between themselves. They drew lines, negotiated spheres of influence, and created rules for claiming African territory. Not one African leader was present. Not one kingdom was consulted. Not one community was asked. Today, Where on Earth tells the story of the most consequential 44 days in the history of geography. To understand what the Berlin Conference changed, you need to understand what existed before it. Africa in the 19th century was not empty land waiting to be organized. It was a continent of kingdoms, empires, trade networks, cities, and long-established political systems. The Mali Empire had once controlled the trade routes of West Africa and became one of the wealthiest states in history. The Kingdom of Congo had diplomacy, administration, and relations with Portugal dating back centuries. The Ashanti Confederacy, the Zulu Kingdom, the Ethiopian Empire, the Swahili city-states, and many others shaped the continent long before European partition, but acknowledging that reality would complicate imperial ambitions, so it was ignored. The Berlin Conference established a principle called effective occupation. European states could only claim land if they showed physical control. This triggered the scramble for Africa. In the decades that followed, powers rushed inland planting flags, signing unequal treaties, and building colonial administrations. By 1914, around 90% of Africa was under European colonial rule. The borders that emerged were often drawn with three tools. The first was the ruler. Straight lines across deserts and savannas, fixed by latitude and longitude. The second was the river. Waterways that had connected communities for centuries were suddenly turned into borders that divided them. The third was negotiation between rival European empires. If two powers wanted the same region, they simply divided it on a map. The people living there had no say. The result was borders that often ignored languages, trade routes, ethnic communities, and historical realities. The consequences are still visible today. The Somali people were divided across multiple colonial territories, later becoming Somalia, Djibouti, and parts of Ethiopia and Kenya. The Yu people were split between Ghana and Togo. The Afar between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti. Across the continent, families and communities found themselves separated by borders they never chose. At the same time, rival groups with no history of shared governance were placed inside the same new states. Nigeria was created by merging very different regions into one administrative unit. Tensions rooted in that structure later contributed to the Biafran War. In Rwanda, colonial rule hardened social identities into rigid categories, deepening divisions whose consequences became catastrophic decades later. In the Congo, extraction and brutal colonial administration left scars that still shape instability today. So why were these borders kept after independence? Because changing them risked even more conflict. In 1964, African leaders chose to preserve inherited colonial borders rather than trigger continent-wide territorial wars. It was a pragmatic decision, but a painful one. The borders remained, along with many of the tensions inside them. Can they be fixed today? Sometimes borders change, as South Sudan's independence showed, but changing lines does not automatically solve deeper political and social problems. The honest geographic answer is that there is no simple solution. The lines drawn in Berlin over a century ago are still on the map. They still separate communities. They still trap rivals inside fragile states. They still shape conflict, migration, and political instability. 44 days in Berlin helped define the geography of modern Africa, and the world is still living with the consequences. Subscribe to Where on Earth for weekly geography that connects the past to the present, because the world looks very different when you understand who drew the map.